Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special Pro Soccer Talk as we are speaking to USMNT legend Eddie Lewis today. Eddie, thanks so much for joining us. How are you? How are things in California, mate?
I'm well. Life is good. I'm excited to be a soccer fan. We have quite a month ahead of us, so nothing to complain about for sure. Early morning soccer, and my days will be set.
Oh, you're used to that in California, right? Waking up for Premier League and everything at the weekends.
Yeah, no, it's right. I when that first started, I thought that's going to be tough, and it's now my favorite thing. The fact that I can have a cup of coffee and be watching world-class soccer straight away is epic.
Amazing. And you've been really busy in your post-playing career. We're going to talk a lot about your days playing in England, playing for the US national team at World Cups. But with Toca, you have created something really incredible as the founder there. And someone told me Harry Kane has been part of investment recently. So explain what you're doing and how you're helping to shape the future of soccer in America, because this is really intriguing to us, Eddie.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, Harry is a recent investor that we're very proud about. So I am now a Harry Kane fan. That doesn't mean I'm an England or Tottenham fan, but yes, I'm a Harry Kane fan. But yeah, essentially, it was just after I retired, really built this training concept off of my own experiences as a player, kind of this automated ball machine and using a smaller ball. And really, have taken that from a simple training concept to now one that involves interactive targets. Really focuses on players' technical ability as well as their decision making. It's proved to be a real success. We're now the largest soccer center operator in North America, which we're very proud about. And at the same time, through that process, we took advantage of the fact that this experience was so engaging that we spun off what we now call Toca Social and launched a little over a year ago in London at the O2 Arena. It's essentially, I guess, what people are calling the Top Golf for soccer, but it's a really engaging experience that allows players to go in and hit volleys, compete with friends, shoot on targets, all while you're having a drink and some excellent food with your mates. So it's gone extremely well. We're really excited to bring the concept now to North America, both in the US and in Mexico. We're looking at plans across Western Europe. So a lot of really exciting things going on and a fun part of the sport to be involved with.
That's really fun. I can imagine Nick, Andy, and I, after a few beers, trying some of those skills, probably would help us loosen up, I think, guys, and have a bit more success. But yeah, that's so fun to listen and learn about, Eddie. And I think I read one of your other interviews where you said when you were growing up and playing, you just weren't getting enough touches of the ball and to develop the skill that way. And is that one of the things that really helps you drive and try and help the next generation of American players and players all around the world, but with a US focus and our US hats on? Is that something you'd really like to see develop with US players? Because we can see it now with Pulisic, Reyna, Aronson. Obviously, some really good things are happening at youth level across the US. Is that what we want to see more of going forward, and how you guys can help?
Yeah, I think that's really it. Without getting down too big of a technical rabbit hole. Essentially, when I was growing up, it was, hey, listen, Americans are playing too many other sports. They're too focused on education. It's not in their blood. They're not playing soccer in the streets all day, every day. So as a result, you're just not going to get as many touches. And ultimately that means, you won't be able to produce as good of a player. And so for me, that meant, well, let's just find a way to get more touches then. And, what we've created in Toca is really about that. Right. And I would say for any soccer player at any level, anywhere in the world, they're going to say that the two most valuable assets for any soccer player on any pitch are time and space, right? That is the game. And in order to do that, you need to have a good technical ability as well as, be able to make good decisions at the right moments. And for us in our centers, that's what we train, anywhere from young players right up to pros every single day. I mean, 300 to 400 times in an hour, a player will have to make a decision before they receive the ball, and then quickly, in whatever technical area we have them training, receive the ball and play. And the reduction that time on the ball or the increased speed of play, as becomes a huge differentiator in terms of the level these kids can play at. So I don't see any reason why every player shouldn't be at a much higher technical and decision-making level than they currently are today, because we have the ability to train it. And, so for us, it's really exciting. And I think, already the number of players, both on the boys and girls sides that are coming through, I think are going to prove really great times for the U.S. ahead.
You talked about technical skill, Eddie. When you were playing for the national team, I'm a little bit older than these guys, is when I was really falling in love with not just the sport, but falling in love with the sport through your team. I mean, more than a club, the U.S. being good took my love for the sport to another level. And it's funny, I wanted to ask you about the roster in a different sort of sense. As a player who all of my soccer was based on being faster than everybody else, so I always loved the big center backs. I always rooted for the center backs. For some reason, they were my favorite players. So who is your favorite player on the roster right now? Is it somebody who plays a similar way to you? And who's the most important player on this roster?
Those are tough questions. I'd say Weston's probably the most important player, just because I think he ties the midfield together better than anyone else. I think the best player, probably not necessarily today, but I think the best player will prove to be Gio Reyna over time. I think he has everything from a technical standpoint, but I think probably the things he has outside of it, his hunger and his desire are just at a different level. And I've been lucky enough to kind of see it through a lot of his life. But at the end of the day, much like the 2002 or some of the older teams that I think you were referencing, this team will succeed because of its ability to play as a unit, right? It's not because we have outrageous standout players. Yes, there are some very good players and they're playing at really good clubs. Some are playing more than others, but for me, it's going to be because this unit comes together and, finds that extra element that, allows them to be stronger together than, the handful of individuals that people will talk about.
Yeah, Eddie, I count myself as another soccer child of 2002. So thank you for that. I remember waking up the 2 a.m. kickoff times here in the Central Time Zone. So the early morning soccer, big time agreement there. On Gregg as the head coach, obviously somebody pretty well, went to a couple of World Cups with him. I guess we're almost 4 full years into his tenure as head coach of the U.S. men's national team. One, what have you made of the program that he took over, because it was a very, very big, tall task, back 4 years ago. And 2, what is maybe something that people don't know about Gregg? Because I'm thinking, being the national team manager sounds fun and awesome, but then you kind of have an entire country that just questions and critiques and calls for your job at every single decision. And so it feels like we don't actually get to know who he is. So maybe make Gregg, a little bit more likable for some people out there who are questioning the roster decisions.
Yeah, and Gregg does get sometimes, I think, a tough rap for sure. I think from a personality standpoint, he is who he is. He's extremely disciplined. I think he's very thoughtful about the game. He knows what he's talking about. I mean, he's a player that, and you just know this. There was players we played with that you knew were going to be coaches even while they were playing, right? Because it was just how they saw the game, how they talked about the game, what they took away from the games. And I think Gregg's a great example of one of those guys. I think he's done very well, really as a national team manager, considering I think the age of a lot of the squad, the fallout after not making the World Cup, probably whether it's intentional or not, there's still a lot of attention on 2026, and the fact that is this a team that's also being built for that, and those are things that are just sort of undeniable. As far as Gregg's personality, I think at the end of the day, underneath it all, he's a pretty simple guy, a really nice guy. loves hip hop. So, we have plenty of conversations, about that, not as much anymore, but, what you see is kind of what you get, right? He's not going to go inside the locker room and all of a sudden start doing cartwheels, and all the rest, but he's extremely committed. I think he's done a great job not getting caught up, in a lot of the hype. And at the end of the day, it's about the players, right? If you talk to the players, I think they're excited to play for him. They like what he's done with the program. And for me, that's always, the ultimate litmus test.
Eddie, obviously all the focus with the US men's national team and Gregg right now is on this World Cup. But as Nick and Andy mentioned, 2002, that was huge for soccer in the US. And the popularity just seems to have gone through the roof ever since and continues to do so. And hopefully there's still, we all know, a lot more left to go in the progression for the sport in the States. But for you personally, in your US career, was that the fondest moment looking back at that 2002 tournament for you and the role you played in that team going so deep in the tournament?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really just because of the things you mentioned, obviously getting to the quarterfinals was a huge milestone, but particularly in that generation, there was so much about trying to move the sport forward, trying to gain some international kind of credibility, right? Trying to get more of us, to Europe, and I just felt like those players really carried that weight, on their shoulders, and since then it's changed, for sure a bit. I would have preferred that quarterfinals to be, long in the history and not something we're still talking about as the best the U.S. has done, in the last 20 years. So I'm hoping we can break through those barriers soon. But it absolutely is a huge credit to that, entire group, that it was way more than just that individual. It was trying to move this country closer to where we thought they should be from a soccer perspective. And whether you're talking about the super young talent in Landon and Bees, or the most senior players in, the Ernies and Joe Maxes and Kobe's, and obviously the core of us that were kind of right there in the middle with the team, it was a huge balance. And I think, says a lot about, who we were as individuals as well.
And I want to ask you about your time going over to England, but specifically making the move when you did. You're talking 26 years old, right? So not quite at the same age of when Gio goes over or when some of these other guys go over. But at the same time, you talked about the goal being Europe. At the time, MLS is obviously not as far along as it is now as a project. But when you first made that adjustment, can you talk about where you think what it meant at the time for an American to go versus what it now means and how it's viewed now?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I mean, I had to fight and claw my way over there, right? MLS made it, very challenging at the time to leave. Nobody else was doing it, right? I think as far as transfers from the MLS, there may have been one or two before me, but I was definitely one of the first. And it wasn't really because of anything other than the fact that Europe had this unlimited ceiling, right? If you did well, you could go all the way to the top, and if you weren't any good, they'd kick you out the door and send you home because there was 50 other people waiting to kind of take your job at any moment. And I loved everything about that. And to me, that always really appealed to me. And I think, part of the success of my generation, starting to make inroads into Europe, the guys after me, I mean, really, if you look at kind of the progress, even at a club like Fulham, and the success the players started to have, after me on a more regular basis, and what they've done, it's made huge strides for this young generation today. And the fact that they can, now, and they deserve it, but it's because there's a certain level of respect already built into what a U.S. player is capable of. And truth be told, Americans are wonderful, imports in many ways in Europe, because not only are they good soccer players, they're desperate to get better. They want to learn. They're hungry for success. They're pretty, generally pretty well, educated kids, right? And it matters. And if you're a coach and you're trying to manage this entire squad, and you got a guy who's a really good soccer player, but also comes to train every day, busts his ass, isn't complaining, isn't going to get into, a ton of trouble, off the field, it matters. And I think, over time, we're going to just see more and more players in Europe and, hopefully a better national team as a result.
Eddie, obviously one of your former teams is Leeds United, and we see Tyler Adams, Brendan Aronson doing really well there. Jesse Marsh obviously had his ups and downs this season, but they're playing really well for him. Had some big wins recently. I just was wondering about what you think about him as a manager, and how those guys are doing at Leeds, because I remember watching you play at Leeds. I'm a Southampton fan. When I was younger, I remember a game at St Mary's. You were 3-0 down at half-time, and then Leeds come back and won 4-3, and you were playing in that. And as a huge fan of yours, that was great to see. I'm delighted for you, but as a Southampton fan, that was pretty disappointing. But anyway, on Leeds United, the players there and Jesse Marsh, it seems like they are taking that respect level of American players in Europe and in the Premier League kind of to the next level, right?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Obviously, Leeds will always have a very special place in not just me, but my family's heart as well. We love that club. Jesse's a great example. Another MLS product that is now coaching at the highest level, which I think is both a massive win for America and the MLS. I will say the team at the end of last season, obviously was barely hanging on and sort of escaped relegation, at the death there. Then they sell, both Kelvin and Rafinha to massive clubs, and they needed help already, in my opinion, in terms of more players, and then to have sold. And I would have expected probably more players to be coming in, but certainly Tyler and Brendan are wonderful assets for the club, but it's a tough task for Jesse. He doesn't have, the squad. He kind of has to play a certain way as a result of it. I think he gets some grief because of it, but it to a certain extent, it is what it is. And, it's the most competitive league in the world. And, anything short of, relegation, I think is somewhat of a success given the squad that they currently have. I don't know what the spending plan is in the transfer window here coming up, but it's probably not going to be massive. So having said that, I'm really rooting for Jesse. Obviously I'm a Leeds fan, and the guys that are there, and I think he'll do okay. I think we'll get through this season, but I think there needs to be a real conversation around how to get the club to the next level from there.
Let's talk expectations for the U.S. at the World Cup. You mentioned the fact that the eyes are maybe one eye on 2026, one eye on 2022. So does success at this World Cup look like getting to a certain point? Does it look like maturity and growth from a lot of these young players to you, Eddie? What does, if I say the U.S. men's national team has a successful 2022 World Cup, what does that look like to you?
I think we have to get out of the group. I think no matter what happens, I think we'll always be able to kind of explain our way out of it. But just from a momentum perspective, I think it's important we get out of the group, right? And I think there's two very winnable games. I'd be less focused on the England game and trying to get a draw from there, but rather focus on winning the games that they know they can win. And, the start is key to any World Cup success. So, this first game against Wales is critical. You've seen, some very top countries drop out of World Cups because of a slow start. So I think the start is critical. I don't think the way in which we play will be as important as the results, as much as I care about that and want that to go well. So, but I think if we don't get out of the group, it's just, it feels like we're going to be just stuck in neutral. What happens after that, I think is kind of a different conversation, but we have to find a way, one way or another, to get out of that group.
Just one player on the squad that's been to a World Cup before. Obviously, that's DeAndre Yedlin in 2014. What are those young guys, or some of the not so young guys on the squad as well, that have not been? What are they in for? That first game, maybe first time they walk out of the tunnel. It's such a momentous thing around the world, and we build it up, and then it comes, and you're suddenly thrust into that moment. What is that like?
It's Yeah, it's a factor, but at the same time, in some ways it can work to your advantage in the sense that you almost don't realize how big of an occasion it is, right? I think back to 2002 and the first game and just watching bees light up Portugal, and he was on fire, and because he was just going out there to play, and hopefully it's that same mentality. This tournament already is so unique in that the preparation time is so limited. I used to think that's going to be a real advantage for the US because it's going to kind of level the playing field because nobody's going to really have as much time to prepare. More recently, I've kind of gone back now the other direction, thinking, well, it's probably going to be better off for the bigger clubs because they don't have, they're not as concerned about those tactics or anything else, right? Like Argentina, they'll play anybody in the world tomorrow and they don't care. They're ready to go, right? Brazil, they'll play barefooted if they need to, right? And they're not even going to think twice about it. So I think the younger teams are probably, or the less experienced teams probably going to be more concerned about making sure everybody's, really dialed in. So we'll see. But I'm excited to just get the whole thing started so I can stop this mental merry-go-round I'm dealing with like everybody else.
Eddie, there are games in men's national team history that were perhaps more important and moments that were more dramatic. I know we've seen Donovan's goal a million times at the World Cup, but you played and assisted in my favorite game of all time, and that is beating Mexico at a World Cup. And I just kind of want, not to be Chris Farley with Paul McCartney from Saturday Night Live, but was that awesome?
It still is my favorite moment for a few reasons, right? Number one, what it meant to get to the quarterfinals, which we talked about. Number two, it was against our biggest rival that we had spent, really the majority of my national team career trying to change, right? Trying to kind of take that throne from them, which we were doing. And probably my favorite part was the chance that, I could now contribute. I would say if there was, 100 skills in soccer, there's 99 of them that I wouldn't necessarily say, me as a player would be the first person you think of when you talk about that skill. But if you're talking about crossing the ball, I would, put myself up against anybody in the world, and to be able to get that opportunity at that moment, there was that the whole thing slowed down. That was the most comfortable I'd ever felt. And, for that to happen and go the way it did in the end, it felt good that I got my moment, where I needed it and what I could do. And ultimately at the biggest stage did it. So very, very proud. And I share a lot of those same feelings for sure.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah.
Good. And Dos Cero was born,
Yeah.
And may it long continue, Eddie. And we want to say thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks for all the great memories that we've watched you play in and make for the US and all your club teams over the years. It's been a real privilege to watch that and then to speak with you today. And obviously, best of luck with Toca and all the great work you're doing, developing the future of the game in the US and elsewhere. And let's hope for a great World Cup for the US. And hopefully we'll speak to you very soon. Indeed. But thanks for joining us, Eddie. We really appreciate your time, mate.
Yeah. We'll be having watch parties all across all of our centers, and hopefully, to your point, making new memories, making better memories. I think we're all excited.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us, Eddie. Really appreciate it. And best of luck with everything, mate.
All righty. Cheers, fellas.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lowe, studio host for NBC's coverage of the Premier League. Don't forget to hit subscribe to watch more videos all season long. For even more Premier League content, from original series to live matches, head over to Peacock and be sure to tune in for Premier League mornings every weekend on USA Network and on Peacock. We will see you over there.